Hey, everybody, boy, oh boy, I got a smooth dude on the channel today. Watch out, this man gonna tell you something that's gonna blow your mind. Cause he's a mind blower. Yeah. And I just asked him, I said, man, you in one of them fraternities? And he names it. He in one of them frats. Did you go to HBCU?
Yeah, I went to Fisk.
There you go, frat man, Fisk. This is what I do with Strong Inspirations. I come up with these people that they tight. And I asked them, can you come on the channel and share some Black history? Because this is where you get it straight, no chaser, my friends. I let the people do the talking. You know, I just do my blurb at the beginning, and some of my blurb goes like, did you see the video I got on the channel where the guy says that there was some brothers that cornered some white racists up against the wall? He cites in the video times that we fought back, that we didn't go down easy in Tulsa. He says that, watch that video. And we ain't never gone down easy. How about this one? Did you see the video where the guy says that slaves escaped mostly through Georgia, South Carolina, ended up on the French side of America? French was American, Spanish, what have you, down in Florida, and they had a fort, and that's where they lived. Once they got to the fort, they was free, called Fort Mose. Watch that video. Did you see the one I got with the guy who was in jail with Dr. King in Albany, New York? He's a doctor. I know him personally. I was so happy to have him on the channel. He's 90-something years old. Watch that video. You're going to like Strong Inspiration, and watch this one. Share it with your kids and in them classrooms. My man Tight, watch. You're going to blow your mind. Everybody, a couple things more. I got my own festival and things is working out. We got a Black History Festival in Kansas City, Kansas, in an area that's an underground railroad stop called Quindaro. You're going to hear the voices. May 27th through the 29th. It's very reasonable. I feed you and I give you some juice. Can't give you no liquor. It's for a weekend. Come check it out. Go to my website, businessintheblack.net. You know, I got this movie out. I'm this serious. And it's good. I took it to 40 cities. It's called The Business in the Black, The Rise of Black Business in America. And I'm telling you, slaves went to college. They went to his university. Watch, he's going to tell you a little bit about that. Unbelievable stories in my documentary streaming on Amazon. Then I wrote the book, got more names, more facts. Get you a copy of my book, Black Business Book. It's very reasonable. If you know a lot, you'll know something new still. I guarantee it, or I give you money back. My book and everything, the festival is on my website, which is businessintheblack.net. And in the black is where you want to be. Because you in the red, that's not good. You're losing money. Now you hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong, my favorite term, man. I wish I lived on Strong Street. I like the word strong. And it says this in my world: strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace, which, hey, check this out. That is my introduction to my guest today. He's a strong soul brother. Come on and tell us your name. Let's get it on. Thank you for being on Strong Inspirations.
Thank you for having me. My name is William Spivey. I mentioned I went to Fisk University. I don't go anywhere without telling people that. I happen to be a member of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, but I got love for all the other fraternities and sororities out there. So yeah, I have no problem with anybody else or anybody that's not.
No question.
That's fine too. And you mentioned Fort Mose. I actually wrote a story about Fort Mose one time. I'll send it to you at a later time.
Okay.
And but that's a deep story, and you don't hear too much about the people that escaped south.
Yeah.
And you know, tried to get to Cuba, and what happened to them. So that's another story.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we got to delve into that because but before we do that, I got to ask you a couple quick. Where you from? Where you from?
I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota originally. Grew up on the south side. Prince was on the north side.
Yeah.
But I did know him. I've met him and know some of his compadres. I went to high school with members at the time, and And but Minneapolis is my home, although I don't get back there much now. It's a little cold. I
Yeah.
live
But
in
hold
Florida
on, now
now.
let's stay with that story for a minute. So you knew
Okay.
you hung out at the palace?
No, I was there when he was like high school age, and he was just getting
Oh,
started out when he was
really?
playing all the instruments. He had a couple of bands he played in on the north side, and like I said, I went to high school with like Jelly Bean was the drummer for the time, and
Okay.
also did a lot of stuff with Prince and we, I knew some of the people I've met, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis was a couple years behind me. He was actually a track star for North High School.
Oh,
And
really?
I knew of him, and he probably knew of me because the athletes kind of knew each other. But I was a basketball player,
Oh,
and he played
really?
basketball too. Despite his height, he was a pretty good basketball player.
Okay.
So I knew of him, but didn't know him.
Yeah. Did you play ball at Fisk?
I did.
Okay.
Played basketball for 4 years, and it gave me a chance to travel the South and see a bunch of other HBCUs. So that was a blessing in and of itself.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's beautiful, man. And so, do you know how your family got to Minnesota?
My grandfather was a porter, and he was up and down the railways. And I think he got to Minnesota before a whole lot of when there wasn't that many Black people there.
Oh,
And
really?
so that's how my family got to Minnesota.
Do you know what a porter that life, and can it tell us that what that could be like?
I've only read about it more so than I did, and I regret mostly that I didn't talk to my grandparents a lot about what they experienced and get a lot
Yeah.
of it firsthand. The porters, worked the railroad system and were, bellboys, handled luggage, treated the
Okay.
customers, and worked in the dining car and things like that. And I've read more about it since my grandfather passed, and
Yeah.
I wish I'd had a chance to get some of those stories firsthand.
Oh, yeah. Well, I understand. Me too. Yeah. And I wasn't thinking like I am now. And so, do you know of any Blackish stories in Minnesota?
I do. Um, and you tested my memory. I need to take some provision. Uh, the famous singer that wasn't allowed to perform in D.C. Um, and was by the National League of Voters, I think, uh, helped her to be able to sing it in D.C. She had been in Minnesota first, in Minneapolis, trying to appear, and they wouldn't let her stay in one of the hotels there. And there was actually a Black group that formed. Harry Davis was one of the leaders of that group, who later on became a candidate for mayor of Minneapolis. But they arranged to be able to get her to stay. And he was an opera singer, and I feel bad to not
Like
be able to
Catherine
talk.
Battle or something like that?
No, before that.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll figure that one out. Yeah, that's
Okay.
okay. Yeah. So Minnesota is what's the Black neighborhood in Minnesota?
They've got two Black neighborhoods, more or less. On the north side, it's predominantly Black, and on the south side, it has a Black section. Now, since I've lived there, there's Somalians and some other people have come there. There's always been a Native American area, but pretty much on the north side, in the city itself, I was born on the north side and
Okay.
lived in some projects that were built over some of the poorest land in the country off of Olson Highway.
Hold on. That's
Since
your
then,
background,
it's
really?
well, that was till I was like 6 or 7, so I barely
Oh man,
remember it.
yeah,
And
man.
there was a community center, the Phyllis Wheatley Center, after the poet,
Yeah,
and that was right there, almost a block from my house on 909 Aldrich.
yeah,
And so I got a chance to play with a lot of kids and also see some Black history, even though I wasn't paying much attention to it at that age. But I was
yeah,
exposed to it, and maybe that's what helps me to focus on it at this time in my life.
yeah. Now the Black neighborhood in Minnesota, what was the street that was the business district? Did it have a separate name?
They had a street, Plymouth Avenue, was
Okay,
the street that had most of the Black businesses on the north side.
okay.
On the south side, there was a corner, and there was an entrepreneur named Crown, and he had his own corner. He had a barbershop, a record shop, and a few other things all in one corner. It was his corner.
Oh, really?
And so that was the place to go. But on the north side, there was Plymouth Avenue, which was a long main street but it was also the site of riots in the 60s. That when they had riots, that's where a lot of riots were, and some of that area got burned down.
Oh, really? And that's and so Minnesota being as it is, that what directed you maybe to like Black history then? Let me ask that.
Well, it was probably because I went to Fisk, and when I went to Fisk,
Okay.
I didn't really know much about it. I happened to be a National Merit semifinalist and got letters from schools all over the country. And my parents and grandparents knew more about Fisk than I did, and they saw the letters from Fisk and the opportunity to go there. They said, "You're going to Fisk."
I love it.
And when I got there and started to see it, I was there and didn't appreciate all that I was exposed to.
Yeah.
For example, Aaron Douglas, one of the famous Harlem Renaissance artists, was on the faculty at Fisk, and there were murals he had done in our administration building, and they were on the second floor, and I never had any cause to go up there. There weren't any offices. You went there, and it wasn't until maybe 20 or 30 years after I graduated before I went back to see those murals. And we've had, a lot of famous Fisk graduates and people that attended and taught there. Du Bois was there,
Okay.
John Hope Franklin, historian, and there's a whole lot of people. And although I was exposed to it all, there was.
Let me ask you this: did you go to all Black school in Minnesota?
No.
Grade school, high school.
They had two schools that were mostly Black. In the north side, it was North High, and on the south side, it was Central High. But I went across town because my mother felt that I would do better outside of that environment. So I went to Marshall University High, and I took the city bus across town, which was right by the University of Minnesota. And I went to a private school in 7th grade, and they merged with the public school. So I went to Marshall University High.
I'm gonna stay on you just a tad bit more, man, because you rock
okay.
It. Well, how about
I'll follow you.
did you ever face racism in Minnesota? It was growing up in school. Okay, you smart, man. They can see the talent. You ever face that?
Yes, and it wasn't
really
explicit. It was always part of everything, but it wasn't that I was an athlete. I got a special kind of treatment.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, it wasn't that bad as a high school student.
Yeah.
Because I'd get on the city bus, and the city bus, the population of the city is about 15% Black at the time.
Okay.
And the places I went, I was surrounded by Black people. Went to Black church across town because there wasn't a Black church. Well, actually there was, but there wasn't a Black church near me.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, so we'd go across town to where the north side, where the Black churches generally were.
Yeah.
I went to Zion Baptist Church, one of the bigger churches in the area.
Okay.
And but yes, it was there, but it wasn't like a dominant factor in my life.
Yeah.
And when
we wasn't here in Detroit. Man, we 80% Black. we weren't taking none of that noise. And that's and that shaped somebody too, though. How they grow up, because I've got people on the channel that grew up Gullah Geechee and grew up Keep Creole, and a whole bunch of dynamics which exposed to different things. And I think that if you and maybe when we talk about people in Black history growing up in some southern territories, it's amazing how some can have a for lack of a better word, docile type personality toward it, and some of them are really aggressive. In that. And so the story you want to tell us is what in particular?
I wanted to talk about the forced breeding and rape of enslaved people during the history of slavery and afterwards in this country, which is a serious topic and one you don't hear too much about and can't find that much about.
Okay.
When I Google that subject, I find that I've got most of the top stories on it because I'm writing about it and almost nobody else is. And if you look at what historians say, they document the high birth rate among enslaved people during the entire period of slavery, but they attribute it to natural increase, which somehow, just because I guess Black people just love to have babies, according to them. when the reality was that they were being forced to breed, sometimes with bucks, or the biggest black men. You've heard the word breeders before, about women with the wide hips and looked like they'd have a lot of children, and the slavers looked forward to that. They looked for that when they were at the lot at
They look
uh,
for
the
black
market.
women with wide hips.
Well, they look for women with wide hips. The bigger the better, the stronger the better, because they wanted to produce larger, stronger children. And part of the rate of the purchase rate was based on the size of the child. Bigger children got more money because they were
Oh,
perceived to be able
okay.
to do more work. But in addition to being forced to breed sometimes with other black enslaved people, they were also subject to be raped by their white masters, the white master's relatives, friends of the family, visitors, because the children that were the product of that were lighter skins and therefore perceived to have a different value, that they were able to be, house. I'll say Negroes. I don't know what the policy is
Yeah.
on your podcast,
Okay.
and also that the females, the light skinned females, were often made to be fancies, which is another word for prostitutes, to serve the white um, populace that wanted to be able to go and purchase
Okay.
time with a black female.
Okay. I like your perspective here. Okay. Yeah. Keep going, man. I got no questions at
Okay,
this
and it
point.
gets deeper than that, because when you have states like Virginia and Delaware and Maryland that were initially tobacco states, tobacco, hit a time where it was very hard to produce the same kind of product that they did before. In that they didn't rotate their crops, they didn't follow even some of the practices that were known at the time in Britain and elsewhere, and they found they were unable to produce the amount of tobacco that they had been, and they had all these extra enslaved people they couldn't do anything with, so they're trying to sell them to the further south, where they're used on sugar plantations and rice plantations and cotton, and so that's one aspect of it. The other is that they had competition from the international slave trade, and you look at the price they were able to get for an enslaved person that was born in America versus the price of one that came off the boat. They were undercutting the international slave trade was undercutting the price of domestic slaves. And what they did, and this starts from the Constitution itself. In the
Okay, hold on.
Constitution,
Okay, you might have lost me there. Go back over that. They would.
okay,
How was that possible? What? Explain that again a little bit.
all right. You have two sources of enslaved people once
Right.
there was a population established in the country. They either continued to come on via the international slave trade from
Right.
Africa, or sometimes they might have went to the Caribbean first and then that way
Right.
and back up to America, or they were born here and then those children were sold down south.
Right.
In well, I'll focus on Virginia because I want to talk about Thomas Jefferson in particular,
Okay.
because he plays a significant role in all this. He had a Monticello, which over the lifetime of the time he owned that property and his other properties, he owned 600 enslaved people. And he didn't have, I've been to Monticello, and presently, and even before that, they didn't produce the amount of tobacco to be able to justify having all those people. And he always had financial problems, and he was able to do what he did by, because he built the University of Virginia using enslaved people. He kept up. He wanted to have fancy parties. He had a lavish lifestyle, and he was able to keep that up by selling enslaved people further south. And this is the same pattern of almost all Virginia slaveholders, is that they made money off of selling people south,
Okay.
further
I
south.
understand that. Now let's go back to this one though that you alluded earlier. How much would it cost? What's the price comparison between buying somebody off the boat, let's say, than raising them here and having them here? There's no cost to making them breed. So it's all about, do I want to just keep it and do what I can to make them breed here and not have to even buy any off the boat, right?
Well, and I can't give you a percentage But at the time, it was less expensive to buy them off the boat, if you will. And
Really?
Charleston was the biggest port in America for receiving enslaved people. And when they've negotiated the Constitution, South Carolina was one of the states that was very concerned that slavery would be eliminated because their whole economy depended on it. And as one of the concessions that was made to South Carolina and other slave states that received slaves, imported slaves, they agreed that it would be at least 20 years before they could stop the international slave trade. And that kind of pacified South Carolina. So we got at least 20 years to do that. And it's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the Constitution that has that clause. It had to be 20 years. And that was Thomas Jefferson was not yet president yet. He was president when those 20 years came up. And the year prior to them reaching that 20-year threshold, he passed legislation so that on the very first day after that 20 years was up, he ended the international slave trade. Now, historians will lie to you. They will tell you that that was a prelude to ending slavery. But actually, it was to get rid of the competition. If you consider it protectionism, it was to get rid of the competition so that they didn't have to compete against the international slave trade anymore, that all the slaves now to be sold in America, except for those that were smuggled in, were to be those that were domestically produced. So that means they get to charge a higher price because they had no competition.
Okay, so, hold on. Now, oh man, you deep. Dang, dude, hold on. Everybody's, this is some good stuff. Oh, okay. Who made money off the slave trade? How the government? How did they make money off of it? How did the city or something like that make money off of it? How did the guy who brought them in make money off of it? Do you know those?
Okay, I know a little bit about that.
Okay.
And this is again part of the Constitution, South Carolina agreed that you could tax the import of enslaved people, but it couldn't be more than a certain dollar amount or percentage. So they limited the amount of taxes you could charge for the sale of enslaved people, but they were taxed, so therefore money went to the government.
On the sale?
On the sale. So they were taxed at that time. And then you look at the products and they had taxes on goods, tobacco and sugar and rice and cotton, and all of those things were taxed at sale. So that led to governments making money off that. And if you were in one of those port cities like New Orleans or Charleston, then you had ports that got built up as a result, and as goods and products got shipped in, whether it was related to enslavement or not, that led to the economy, that helped the economy of those cities. And then because people came there to purchase, they needed hotels. So cities got built up as a result of enslavement being a critical factor of the economy.
Because you alluded to that earlier when you said how dependent Charleston was. They were, so when the slave trade coming through there made Charleston a big town. People coming in, buying the slaves, like you said, staying in the hotels, restaurants, the kind of businesses that sprang up as a result of that.
Okay, and then another business that sprang up as a result of that were slave jails. And they were able to, they jailed a lot of people, like runaways, and they brought to slave jails and then sold. And also another factor is the rape of slaves, of slave women. A lot of that happened in the jails too, that they were held in those jails and sometimes raped there. And it's just a terrible thing.
Oh yeah, man, that is deep. That's a different term. So now, and then you have to pay property tax. I guess is one of the things you alluded to on the slaves too. So the government made money that way.
I can't. You may be right. I can't vouch for that.
on property tax.
Yeah.
Okay, I've heard that one. I've heard there's property tax that they had to pay, because it was like, that's why you had to be a big man to house all those slaves. And so how much? What's the cost of having slaves? Let me ask you this. And I want to say enslaves everybody, but slaves. What I mean is, how much does it cost a plantation to have 100 slaves?
It depends on what their function is on that plantation.
Okay.
There are some products like sugar and rice that are very labor intensive, and tobacco, and you have to have a certain number of slaves, enslaved people, to be able to produce the amounts of stuff to make the farm profitable, or the plantation profitable. And it's your cost. You got housing costs, and
So you got the cabin in the back that you had to build.
And well, that they had to build.
They had to build.
And it might not even be a cabin. I've been to, like I said, I've been to Monticello, and Jefferson had a place called, I believe it was Mulberry Row, but it was a row of things right behind the property. And today you can see it from the main house.
Okay.
But previously there were hedges and things like that to catch you, so you didn't really see the enslaved people and how they lived.
Okay.
And the spaces that they lived in were small. They weren't much to look at. And
yeah,
it's what the enslaved people could do.
So you got that one-time cost of the material to build the house, but you make the black people build it.
Then you've got to feed them, and you got
to feed them
the worst of the worst of stuff that the white people didn't want to eat. And that's how we ended up eating chitlins and things like that weren't considered edible by the white people, but they fed you or made you raise your own food, and fed you the leftovers that they didn't want to eat. So you've got food and housing. The one thing that they did that might surprise you is they provided relatively good medical care for the women, because they wanted to keep them having babies. And the mortality rate for mothers in childbirth at the time was fairly high. It might have been as high as 20-30%. So you're going to lose a lot of women during childbirth, white and black. But they made sure that black women got health care, and they were among the first ones to get employer provided health care.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
Because they wanted those women to live and keep having babies.
Okay, so now, let's go to the food situation. You had to grow most of your own food, but then they would give you like say to give you the chitlins.
Leftovers.
Somebody got to cut the pig up. But who?
Mm-hmm.
Did they buy it from the market, or the people, if they had pigs, they
most
had to
places
buy
would have
pigs?
had it themselves. They would have had if they were big enough, they would have had their own hogs and things like that they used not only to raise and eat for themselves, but to sell. And the leftovers that weren't deemed marketable, that then they would give that to the slaves to eat.
Was it again, going back to, I guess, your main premise of the brutality of slavery, was it how could what was the dynamic between the husband, or the plantation owner, and his mistress? And there's a term, mistress of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Who is that? And then what is usually the dynamic with the wife knowing he's doing this and all that, and all that debauchery that they were doing? Let's put it that way.
Okay.
You're going into jail cells and you raping women, you walking out like it's no big deal. What's that dynamic?
In most cases, and you have to recognize that women didn't have a whole lot of rights back in those days. And even as the wife of the master of the plantation, you had very little authority in and of yourself. For the most part, they tended to overlook those children running around that looked a whole lot like their daddies, and just ignore it and just accept it as a thing that just occurred. An individual household, it may be a little bit different. Some women might be able to lay down the law and say, you're not doing this in my house. But for the generally speaking, that women tended to just ignore it because they had no say. We're talking
what
about
would you
the
think
white
the
women.
dynamic is, even in some southern town, let's say like Charleston, where there are some people who got some moral ethics, and they're looking at this guy raping these women, and he's a friend of theirs. He goes to the church with them and everything, but he's,
You have to
we
keep
know
in
he do
mind
this
that
in the evening.
the
Is
church,
there
even
something
in
in that dynamic where we don't like you, man? We stay away from people who do that, or from
well,
slave
I'll tell you
owners in
that the
general?
people that ran the slave jails were looked on as being a little bit lower rung in society. But however, the plantation owners were at the top of the peak, and evangelicals and most of the southern ministers were part of the problem. That none of this could have happened without their endorsement, their support,
Okay.
or at least looking the other way. So it wasn't a case where the majority of churches were lined up against enslavement, although certainly like the Quakers were. And but the same people that are supportive of the right wing today in government are the same churches that endorsed and supported enslavement.
Do you go up through Jim Crow and that kind of thing in some of your research?
Yeah, I write a lot about after enslavement, they were the Black codes, and they immediately came up with some laws to basically try to duplicate slavery the best they could. And then after the Black codes ended, then they came up with Jim Crow. And that was again to replace the Black codes, because as more and more laws got passed to eliminate slavery, to give people the right to vote, to do whatever they did to provide for education, they just came up with new rules. And
Okay.
there was like basically 3 different resurgent periods of the Klan. But even when the Klan wasn't there, they had white councils and white leagues and stuff like that. They were the equivalent of the city council. And there was always something to replace what once was.
How much do you think this bad attitude cost America, I don't know, life? I got a guy on the channel, he's out of Birmingham. He said if Birmingham had not been racist like it was, or I don't know how ever to put it, but Birmingham being racist, the political structure, then they would have been a bigger city. They would have been Atlanta. They would have got a baseball team. Delta Airlines would have moved there because that was part of the plan. And if you look at slavery, is there something that we can say, anything to that regard?
I think it's kind of the opposite, that slavery, because of the lower cost of production, enabled a lot of cities to become larger and more productive, as
Really?
opposed to holding them back. So the first larger cities were all based on enslaved people making that happen, whether it was having the labor pool to be able to produce things, or having cheap labor to make things more profitable, make the economy. The American economy would never have been what it was without the cheap labor sources, which mostly was slavery, but also included the Chinese who helped build the railroads out west, while enslaved people or even freed people helped build them in the South. And I think the economy in most of the major cities, including New York, New York doesn't get credit for its role in slavery in terms of financing a lot of things, financing the boats that went back and forth. And Wall Street used to be, part where a lot of the enslavement related businesses were.
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
What kind of business would that be? You got an
Well,
idea?
they had ports in New York, and Wall Street is right down by the docks. And they also had finance businesses that helps give loans to those plantations so that they could weather through their seasonal processes and pay for the shippers, the merchant ships that traveled back and forth across the ocean.
Oh
So
man, now we own
money
something
makes
here. You
everything
saying
work.
that they got the money out of New York to finance those trips?
That's one of the places, yes. Well, they also got a lot of it from Europe, from England and Portugal.
Well, okay, because okay, let's say the trip cost me $5,000 on the ship to get there. I got to have so many men. I got to pay them. I got to go there and come back. I might be able to, if I sell all the slaves I got, then that's how I make my money to give you your money back for helping me do it.
Yeah. And they
Oh,
also bring, exports of cotton and things like that to Europe.
okay.
Cotton was a big export, and rice and sugar was a big export. They also got sugar from Haiti and other places in the Caribbean. But
Lastly, on this note, we can assume that there's probably nobody who had a boat that was going back and forth that maybe did not bring slaves with them.
well, I'm sure they were passenger cruises,
Okay.
and that the people that brought the indentured servants and the people, the settlers coming to America, probably didn't have enslaved people necessarily on the same ships. Um, but generally speaking, that if that was a company, they had a division that was making money off of the international slave trade.
Oh, really? Uh, man. Okay. Shoot. Is there a question that I have not asked you?
Yeah, I'm doing some research right now on buck breaking, and it's been more established that this happened in the Caribbean. And I apologize if it's going to be a little on the vulgar side, but when a black male enslaved person got, could be considered too uppity or to whatever, that they might actually break him down by raping him, having another man rape him, and they would do it publicly in front of everybody else as an example to everybody else, that to not do whatever that guy did to deserve, quote unquote, being raped.
Now,
Now,
is this during slavery or this is
it
after?
was during slavery for the most part. And I've been trying to document it in America. And what I found mostly is white people claiming it never happened. And these aren't well, some of them actually are historians. But the reasons they're given that it never happened in America are that the penalty would be too high, that they'd be risking that there was such a thing against both homosexuality and rape, that it would never be allowed to happen. Well, I don't believe that whatsoever.
What made you come up
Uh,
with that even being an option, something that could have happened?
well, I've read a story. I've heard the term before, and I've written a lot about the rape and mistreatment of black women, and I haven't written and gotten into what happened to black men. And I ran across some stories about buck breaking in the Caribbean, and it's my belief that there's no way it didn't happen to some degree in America as well.
So they
And
got it documented happening in the Caribbean.
yes, and this is America wasn't a less harsh place.
Yeah, right.
They were just
Sure.
as harsh as those people in Brazil and other places. So I've got to believe it was happening to some degree, but I have yet to find good sources yet. Then I try to source all my material. And if I'm talking about something, believe me, I've researched it.
Yeah. Um. Okay. Yeah. Then yeah, you got something to go. You got another good one of them stories that you've done. Now, how do you do the research? Let's ask you that.
Okay, well, first, thank goodness for the internet that it exists. But saying that a lot of stuff on the internet isn't true either. So I look up the stories, I look up the original documents. Like if I refer to the Constitution, I go back and read the Constitution to see exactly what it said and what that. And then I've taken the time to go some places and try to see for myself so I can put it in better context and get a better. Like I went to Fort Mose and wrote about St. Augustine and history there. And if you go to St. Augustine, I went to what was considered the oldest house in St. Augustine, and they had a tour guide there, and paid a little bit of money to go in, and there was tour guide, and he was telling the story, and then he mentioned um, that he mentioned Fort Mose and the leaders there and their role they played in the war. But in talking about the history of that house, he mentioned the lads that helped out and did this and that. And I said, were those enslaved people? Well, yeah, they were enslaved people. And you have to dig to get, the actual history. And I went to Thomas Jefferson's Monticello and there's a tour bus for part of it that's telling you the history of the place. And they have a big cemetery there where you see where all these people were buried, relatives and things like that. But they also have a little separate Black cemetery that the main cemetery is fenced off and you can't walk through there, but the Black cemetery you can walk all over the graves, and they're mostly unmarked graves, and they're supposed to have a project to redo it and do some of that, but the Black people just basically got thrown in the dirt.
Yeah.
And
now, how
none of
about
those
this? Because we got some more time, just a little bit longer, and I'm edited, a lot of my bad questions. But what about Thomas Jefferson and what was the Sally? The
Sally
lady
Hemings.
what's that story? Do you know that one?
Okay, yeah. She was on his plantation at Monticello. She was 14 years old when he started sleeping.
And what's
with
her name? Say her name again.
Sally Hemings.
Sally Hemings, yes.
Yeah, and she had he had 6 children with her, and initially the family.
Okay, let me go back before that. Is she on the plantation because he bought her, or her family was there and she was born into the plantation? Do you know
I believe
that?
she was born there.
Okay.
I believe she was born there. When she got to be 14, she caught his eye, and she had 6 children by him, and the family denied till finally they got some DNA results that proved that at least 2 of those were belonged to Jefferson, and then finally they came to the understanding that all of her children were from Thomas Jefferson. And you can at Monticello, they'll tell you a little bit of the history of the descendants of Sally Hemings.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
she went to Paris with him on a trip, and in Paris she was free. And if she had not come back to America, she could have remained free in Paris.
Oh, really?
But he reached an agreement with her that if she came back with him, that she would free their children upon his death, apparently. And he mostly held up to that, but he never freed her. When he died, she was still an enslaved person at Monticello, and eventually she left on her own, and they did not go to retrieve her, but she never got rid of the title of being an enslaved woman. And I think she had a couple of brothers, I believe, that he released during his lifetime, one of whom paid for his release. He paid $200 for his freedom. And so he only freed like 4 people of the 600 during his lifetime. And when he died, most of those enslaved people that were left were sold to pay the taxes on Monticello. He gets a lot of credit for being a very nice slave owner, that he was very kind to his people. But there was a letter that was written by a historian that a historian uncovered about how he had a nailery where they actually made nails on the property and sold them, and he found it a way to keep idle hands busy when there wasn't anything else to do. And it was mostly like teenage age boys working there, but he found that one of his people found it was the best way to ensure profitability was to beat them. And a letter was found to that effect, that they were beating the boys at the nailery. And that historian, his name was Edwin Batts, hid the letter and didn't let it come out because that didn't fit the narrative. So Thomas Jefferson kept having this image as a kind master when it wasn't anything like the case. And George Washington gets a lot of credit for having freed his slaves upon his death. And there was a different thing, that Martha Washington actually had more slaves than he did. And because of the way the law was structured, she could not free her slaves, or Washington couldn't free her slaves. But all of a sudden, there were all these slaves that would be free upon her death,
Okay.
Well, she's looking at these people with all this incentive to kill her, so she freed them anyway because they had good cause to want to see her dead.
Oh, okay. Wanted her dead.
Yeah, because when Washington died, and all of a sudden, one set of slaves was freed, and some of them might have been married to others that were owned by her.
Yeah.
And her slaves couldn't go anywhere, and until she died, and she had promised to free them when she died. So the quicker that happened, the quicker those slaves would be
Okay,
free.
I got you.
And she started looking at those people looking at her, and decided, well, maybe I better go ahead and let them go.
Hey, we're gonna stop there because we're gonna come back.
Okay.
Now let me ask you: Are you a historian? You write? Are you at a university? Got your doctorate? Stuff like that.
No, I've got a BA from Fisk University in economics, and my interest in history didn't really start until maybe 20 years after I graduated. And I started writing about this and that, and I started writing on other subjects that involved history, and then I started doing research. And I finally got enough research under my belt where I could start to connect the dots and say, okay, well, this happened and that happened. And then I could think about, well, I bet this had something to do with it. And as an example, there's a act called Posse Comitatus.
Okay.
That basically said the United States can't have the army, its armies act on domestic soil. And where that came from was in 1876, there was a disputed election. And back then, the Democrats were about the same as the Republicans are today. And the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, and actually were in favor of, not quite equality, but better than how things were.
Right.
And so there was 3 states that didn't come up with, clear winners. It was Florida, South Carolina, and I believe Mississippi. And both of them sent slates of electors to Congress, and they were trying to sort it out. So they allowed the Republican to win, which was supposed to be the good thing. But the bad thing was that as part of the deal, they removed all the federal troops from the South that were maintaining order.
Right.
So Reconstruction had been going on for about 10 years.
Right.
And that was the end of Reconstruction, because as soon as the federal troops left, the Democrats took back over. They, in some places, they killed some of the Black people that were in office.
Right.
But as the follow-up to the Compromise of 1877 and 1878, they came up with Posse Comitatus, which basically meant those federal troops could never go back to protect the rights of Black people. So, it just hit me.
That's
sometimes.
A compromise.
The compromise to choose the president meant that they were removing the federal troops.
Yeah, I got
and
you.
The removing of the federal troops meant that that's what brought in Jim Crow.
All right, I got you.
Ended Reconstruction. And, all of that, when I'd seen a TV show called West Wing about politics, and they had an episode about Posse Comitatus. And it had nothing to do with slavery, but I thought about it. You know what? That probably has something to do with slavery. And started looking it up.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden see everything that it had to do with not slavery, because it had been over for, a dozen years.
Right.
But it was all about, the control of Black people.
Wow. Hey, everybody, I'm out of questions. My mind has been blown by this genius. Yeah, he's a genius.
I'd say I wouldn't go that far, but on a good day.
Inspirations. Don't get it twisted, everybody. I love it. And so we'll have him back on. Watch this. I hope, pray he'll come back on. Hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. It don't cost no money. I don't ask no information. Just let me know that you like me. And I know you like this video. Hit the like button. Don't play with it. They don't cost nothing. Just say I like it. Boom. I want a bunch of likes on this one here. Hit the notifications bell when the videos come up. And I'm doing 4 or 5 of them a week, as you can tell. And then tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. Come to my Black History Festival. Follow this brother. What, you got a website?
Yeah, WilliamFspivey.com.
Yes, go to the website. And you got a book out?
I've got a couple I'm working on.
Okay,
And
so
one of
not
them,
yet.
you
When the
like
books
strong. One
come,
of them is called Strong Beginnings. So
yeah. So and stay close, follow him, so on and so forth. And everybody, with that, I'll say this, or to you, my guest, I say this with all sincerity. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love how you have gone from, and I heard you say this, very humble beginnings in your own right. That's the way we'll put it. But with that love and that motivation got you the way you are today, expert. Keep doing it, keep sharing it with the public. And so
and it
what I'll
was
say,
Marian Anderson. Marian Anderson was the name of the opera singer that escaped my
Marianne,
mind
that's
earlier.
right. I remember that. I remember her anyway. With that, I'll say bye-bye, we out, my man. That's the last word.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. All right, William.